Hello, it's your main man, the Pan Man. This is a small video series helping to promote my remix series eGuide. Everything spoken inside of the series and more can be found inside of the eGuide, so if you're interested, I'm going to relaunch the eGuide, of course with some updates, and when you're signed up to the email list, I'll give you a special discount on a new introductory price. If your goal is to build any kind of audience or to attract game developers, you need to be doing video game remixes, and specifically you have to make sure that each of your remixes has the potential to pop off. I won't say go viral, but you get the idea. You want to make sure it's good to catch people's attention, you want to make sure that it holds people's attention, and you want to make sure that you are attracting the type of person that you want through your remix, This brings me to an important lesson that I learned around the time I was writing FusionFall. It's so stupidly simple, but it's only after I heard it that I started actively thinking about it. If people wanted to listen to the original, they would just listen to the original. This is one of those things that now that somebody has said it, you're gonna be consciously aware of it, every time. Part 1 of the series offers 3 crucial suggestions that you can try and implement today inside of your own remixes if you want to improve them. The first method is problem solving. This is exactly what it sounds like. You're solving problems in the songs or collections of songs that you personally don't like. We don't really think about why we don't like music, and specifically how to change it. I didn't like how they did this, I didn't like how they did that, so you make a remix better, or you make the song better, and if you don't like it, someone else doesn't like it, but they hear your remixes, suddenly you just polished a turd. For me, FusionFall Legacy is actually a really good example of problem solving. I noticed a very big problem in the soundtrack as a whole. To my ears, to me personally, it was too monotone. The textures were too similar. You can identify the melodies, but I had a hard time telling tracks apart from my own memory. There wasn't a single song that stuck out to me, unless it had, particular motifs like Ed, Edd n Eddy's thing, everyone knows that. So needless to say, this was a problem I ventured out to solve. The first goal was making sure I could copy the style as to not step away from FusionFall, you know what I mean? Faithfully capturing that style is the main purpose of that demo that I created. After which, I compiled a few musical elements that I could insert to each of the FusionFall Legacy songs. For example, the choir Oz, that was a big one. The low brass stabs, trilling strings, sometimes I put it in horns. Over time, I eventually came up with the idea of having each Cartoon Network IP have its own genre or style associated with it, in addition to those elements I just talked about. So for example, Kids Next Door, I heard a type of a spy funk with it, a little bit leaning towards jazz. Dexter's Laboratory, wanted to go more synth heavy. Fosters, we couldn't get the Fosters unfortunately, or at least not in the way I was expecting. But I wanted to add a lot of harpsichord and kazoo and little stuff like that while still incorporating their elements. And you can kind of hear me starting to do this within the FusionFall Legacy soundtrack. Of course, I was also following instructions and requests by the development team. As I kept saying, I wasn't actually a fan of FusionFall. Well, yeah, not a fan. Once I played it, I was like, yeah, I get it. My point is that most tracks that I did are in completely different textures. The majority of the FusionFall Legacy soundtrack came from me trying to solve that one problem throughout the entire soundtrack. That one conscious effort led to lots of creative remixes, lots of creative decisions surrounding it, both by me, by the dev team. You get the idea. Problem solving can completely transform a song depending on what problem you're trying to fix. And again, I cover more specific examples inside of the guide. But for now, let's move on to the second method or tactic, which is modifying. This is basically adding or subtracting stuff. Adding a new section, rearrange the roadmap. For example, if your song starts with an intro and then a verse, start with a verse, or even start with the chorus and then just rearrange it. Adding little embellishments to the melodies, changing up the melody, simple stuff like that. It's taking what's already there and just reconstructing it by adding or subtracting stuff. You can find me modifying a lot of stuff throughout both my Mario Kart and the FusionFall series. Because, again, if people wanted to listen to the original, they just listen to the original. You have to be doing something that is attempting to grab someone else's attention. It has to be different than not just what the official song is doing, but what other people are doing too, and I really talk about that in another video. With Delightful Developments, I was asked by the team to make a song sound more happy and open while adding that FusionFall style and the Ed Netty style to it. Lots of contrasting things right there. FusionFall style, the original, it's more cinematic cartoony, more marching tempo, like, you get the idea. And Ed Netty is the complete opposite of that, with lots of jazz elements. So my goal was to start with Ed Netty, but layer FusionFall over top of it, instead of the other way around, if that makes sense. It meant giving the song a more jazzy feel, a jazzy swing, just going in jazz in general. First, it was requested that I inserted a common-ish theme from Ed Netty. So I inserted that. For the part immediately after that, the melody was very spacious from FusionFall's original, so I used that to add some soloing in there. I also reused that common trombone walk. It padded out that section well. The melody was too spacious, but the piano was, it wasn't enough to fill in that space, so the trombone walk there kind of helped. Hints of problem solving, anyone? Mm-hmm. The section after that is a little more faithful to the FusionFall original. The reason I did that was to have it act like a bridge between the section before and the section after it, and Will Win part really helped it with. The second to last section modifies the melody, which it hasn't really changed much up to this point. The big hook around this section was going back to that more happy, open feeling, representing the cul-de-sac. Personally speaking, really like how the sax came out at this time. I wish I used better samples though. And finally, the last section is that common Ed Netty walk that we all know. I added that literally for shits and giggles. SNES Vanilla Lake is a more subtle example of utilizing composition more so than genre. I needed to beef up the song. I wanted to beef it up more without killing the original mood of the song. So I had to walk a line between wanting to add more orchestration and not wanting to have so much orchestration that it's distracting from the texture itself, the mood of the song. To approach this, I started with modifying the roadmap. You'll notice that the original starts straight on the melody or verse, whatever you want to call it. Mine, it starts by introducing the texture, because the texture, my texture in that is a little different than the original. The big modifier here was the introduction of the French horn to act as that second melody or counter melody. I also took out the follow-up melody in the second pass where the violin plays to give the French horn element more emphasis. The final section is restating that texture in the intro, only this time highlighting that French horn to, help bring it out. The last section also features the harp. Just basically added a little bit more movement to that same texture, so you're not just hearing the fact that it's repeating. Listening back to this again, as I am like right now, 2024, you can tell that there are some parts that don't sound natural, for lack of a better term. What I mean by that, when you're adding something, like adding melodies or adding flourishes and stuff like that, you want to be constructing those new elements based off motifs already found inside of the remix. This helps connect your song with your idea. It just helps it sound like more natural, and that it doesn't sound like a fan remix, if that makes sense. Part of the soprano sax solo that I did in N64 Calamari Desert is a good example of what I'm talking about. without optimizing your melodies like that, some form of modification to your melodies or to your chords or to your roadmap, big or small, is going to have a very big impact on your remixes over time, and I highly encourage doing that. Without some form of modification, you risk going too close to instrument swapping, and again, I'll talk about that in another video. The last approach here is what I call alterations. This is the low-hanging fruit here. You're going to find this across all fan remixes to some way or some degree. This is changing the genre, changing the mood, changing the texture, changing the gaming era. Like, for example, if the song has sound font quality of like PlayStation 2 or whatever the hell, you downgrade it to 8-bit or 16-bit. Now, I call all of these things musical components. The best way to determine what musical component you should be addressing or altering depends on what concept of the song you have in your head. I was getting a plan together for GBA Sky Garden by listening through a bunch of other remixes. Something I noticed that I didn't want to do is that most of the remixes for GBA Sky Garden at that time, they stuck way too close to the original. Most of them were instrument swapping or gravitated too close to the electronic style. Like, no one was trying to put an acoustic twist on it. I'll be honest, I don't know how I landed on this, but I wanted more color for the piece, so I essentially altered the chord progressions is what I'm getting at here. This led me to mapping out the chord progressions that I wanted and experimenting with 7th chords. I love using 7th chords in my music. You can hear it everywhere in my music. So again, what ended up happening here was an alteration of texture. Now, let's talk about Seaside. Seaside is another good example of alterations. This one is altering the mood, and it's also altering the genre. Similar to Delightful Developments, I was asked to make Seaside more happy, open, more bright, essentially. It being a beach, can't pass up a good bossa nova. I love that style. But I was also asked to incorporate a character statement. Variation B, or Variation 2, was a complete contrast to that because that's where the infected zone was. That is where the entrance to that dungeon was, and it was in a kind of a smoky, like kind of a factory, or not factory, a warehouse. It was supposed to be more eerie, a bit of a contrast to first Seaside. So what I did is, instead of gravitating towards cinematic, I went more ambient electronic. I used more drones, more subtle textures, very low melody, just a complete contrast to the original. Among the dev team, Delightful Developments and Seaside were among their favorites from what I've gathered. And for anyone curious, the third variation was simply the first variation but without any percussion. It was closer to the aquarium, which another song would play, so there was no need to add that little beach feel. Again, if people wanted to listen to the original, they would just listen to the original. You need to make your remixes unique in some way, and one of these three methods help. They really do help. You know, you probably noticed that these three mindsets, these three approaches are kind of gelding together, they're kind of meshing together here. Just one of these methods has a funny way of tackling all three of them at the same time. And that's good, because that means you can just pick one and just full send it, and then you can end up with something really interesting and unique. This is all stuff that I picked up on over time. Like, I wasn't really conscious, I wasn't like consciously trying to do this in the moment of writing each of these remixes. I just wanted to sound different. And that's the real strat here. You gotta try to sound different. You gotta try to sound different in a way intentionally designed to get people's attention. And that's the goal if you're trying to build an audience or attract more game developers to you, or just improve your game remixing. Everything I talk about in this video is packaged inside of my game music remix series eGuide, where I go over building your own remix series with the intent of attracting developers or building an audience. This is good if you're just new into the game music sphere, or trying to get your first few clients, or you've been in the sphere in a while, or if you need something to do while you're waiting for other clients. Why start one in the first place? Well, I actually talk about that in my next video, why every game composer should be doing some form of remixers. If you're interested in the eGuide when it releases, consider joining the waitlist in the link below. You'll not only be notified when it releases, but you'll also get a 50% discount on it when it launches just for you guys. If you have any questions or simply curious about what I'm making next, consider supporting me on Discord. You can join the Discord for free, but I do offer lifetime 50% and 100% off all of my digital products, my royalty-free music, and my e-guides for backers. See you in the next video.